Hey guys, what's up? Welcome to TSki Tutorials, and this is FPS 1.21. So today's episode we're going to learn how to do basic crouching. So this is actually episode 1 of 2 that's going to be covering crouching. Today's episode is going to be how to just make the player crouch when you hold down the shift key and uncrouch when you're not holding down the shift key. And the next episode that's going to come out after this one is going to actually be more of a glitch fix, because right now we have a problem. Say you crouch and you go into a vent or something, and then you let go of crouch. Right now, there's going to be nothing in our script that's going to say when we can't uncrouch. Now, it seems like an obvious thing, but it actually causes a huge problem. So right now, if you crawl into a vent and you let go of shift, the player's just going to stand up through the ceiling and your head's going to get stuck in a wall. So basically, the next episode, we're going to be creating some code and a cube, an invisible cube that floats above your head that's going to detect collisions and know whether or not it's safe to stand up. Alright, so let's actually get into the code of how to do the basic crouching today. So we're going to be using, what, 6 variables? Okay, so the first variable is crouch ratio. Now this is actually going to be, let's see, one of 2 variables that we're actually going to show in the inspector for crouching. So crouch ratio, basically this would, like if you set it to 0.5, that would mean while you're crouching, you're going to be half as tall as just plain standing up. If you set it to 0.25, you're 0.25 times as tall as standing up, and so on and so forth. The next variable is transition to crouch seconds. So basically this is the approximate number of seconds it's going to take to switch between standing up and crouching. So we're using a smooth dam function, so this is just going to be the time section of the smooth dam function so that we can control how fast or how slow our player crouches and stands back up. So the next variable is crouching velocity. So crouching velocity is just the velocity variable that we're going to be using inside of the smooth dam function that transitions us between standing up and crouching. So this is just a variable so that Unity can keep track of how fast it's going up and down so that we can get the smoothest movement out of the smooth dam function. Okay, and the next variable is current crouch ratio. So this is going to be a number that's going to be going between 1 and 0. I believe 1 is standing and 0 is crouching, or it might be vice versa, but it really doesn't matter. So this is going to be the actual number that we're going to smooth damp between. Okay, the next variable is original local scale Y and then crouch local scale Y. So these are going to be the Y local scale targets that we're going to be using, and we're going to be generating both of these variables inside of the awake function. So the first is original local scale. That's just going to save how tall our player is. So when you create your player capsule, you should create it in a standing position, and that's how tall your player is going to be when they're standing up. And then we're going to generate the crouch local scale by multiplying the original local scale by the crouch ratio, so that you don't actually need to figure out the exact number of units of how tall you want your player to be while they're crouching. So we're just going to be using crouch ratio as a fraction to control how tall our player is going to be when it's crouching. Okay, so here's our awake function where we're actually going to generate local scale Y or original local scale Y and crouch local scale Y. So the first line of code we have in here is simply current crouch ratio equals 1. Basically, I just threw this in here just in case you're messing around in the inspector or something in code happens, but basically just to ensure that we are standing up and that the current crouch ratio is going to equal 1. The next variable we have, or the next line of code we have, is original local scale equals transform.localScale.y. So basically, we're just saving how tall the player is right now inside of the variable local scale y, and we're accessing the transform local scale.y. The next line of code we have is crouch local scale y, and basically this is the exact same thing as the original local scale y, except we're just multiplying it by crouch ratio, so that it's going to generate the number in units of how tall the player is going to be based on the ratio that we gave the script. So that way our script can smooth damp between these two numbers, and we don't actually have to worry about the actual number of units that we want it to be. Alright, so here's the code that we're going to be putting inside of the update loop. So our first line of code is actually going to be affecting the local Y scale of our player capsule. So what we're doing is transform.localscale.y equals mathf.lerp, crouch local scale Y, original local scale Y, current ratio crouch. So if you remember how mathf.lerp works, is that you give mathf.lerp three numbers. So here's number 1, or actually here's number 0, here's number 1, and here is the ratio number that we give it, which is current crouch ratio. So current crouch ratio, if it is 0, we're crouching. If it's 1, we're standing. So that means if current crouch ratio is 0, it's going to return us crouch local scale Y, or the number of units of how tall we want our player to be when we're crouching. If crouch ratio or current crouch ratio equals 1, then it's going to give us back original local scale Y, or how tall our player originally was when it was standing. And then if you give it, say, 0.5 or 0.25, it's going to give you a number back between the two accordingly. Okay, so now that our current crouch ratio equals 1, let's actually figure out how to smooth damp it to 0 when we're holding down shift. So we have if input.getButton crouch. So remember, crouch is not a default button like fire 1 or jump or the vertical axis. It is a number that we're going to have to define inside of Unity, and I'm going to show you how to do that inside of Unity. You just go to, what is it, Edit, Project Settings, Input, something like that, if I have that right. But anyways, we'll go over that in this actual screen recording. So basically, if we're holding down the Shift key, we're going to do current ratio crouch equals mathf.smoothDamp, current ratio crouch 0, crouching velocity, transition to crouch seconds. So basically we have the mathf.smoothDamp function, and in case you don't know, mathf.smoothDamp, you give it 4 numbers. The first number you give it is the current number that we're at right here, which is current ratio crouch. The second number you give it is the target that we want it to be at, which for this case, when we're holding down shift, we want it to go to 0, so our target is 0. The next variable is the velocity variable, and we really don't need to worry about this. Unity is going to take care of this variable. We just need to make sure there's one velocity variable for every smooth-damp function, or every smooth-damp function that's going to be going on one at a time. And in this case, we're using crouch velocity. And the next variable is transition to crouch sec, or transition to crouch seconds. And this is the approximate number of seconds it's going to take for it to go from this number to this number. And this whole thing gives us back the number based on the smooth damp and where it's going at that certain time. And we're going to save it inside of current ratio crouch. So the next 2 lines of code are almost identical to the last 2, but they're basically the complete opposite. So basically, if input.getButtonDown crouch equals false, so if we are not holding down the shift key, we're going to set current ratio crouch to mathf.smoothDamp current ratio crouch 1, crouching velocity, transition to crouch sec. So the number that we are currently at right now, current ratio crouch 1, which is our target, and 1 is standing, and then the crouching velocity, and we're using the same velocity variable as we are up here because these two mathf.smoothDamp functions work together, and then transition to crouch seconds. So the approximate number of seconds it's going to take for our player to stand back up. Alright, so now we have determined the current ratio crouched based on whether or not we are holding down shift and we're smooth damping between 0 and 1, and then current ratio crouch is now up here, and it's going to give us back a number in the transform.localscale Y somewhere between crouching and standing based on the current ratio, which is based on whether or not we are holding down the shift key. So yeah, that is pretty much it on how to crouch, and this is the very basics of it. One thing I want to note is that originally in the prototype, I actually did have a couple extra lines of code because there's one tiny problem with this code, and that is right now we are shrinking from the center So if you imagine the player capsule and it shrinks, and then all of a sudden there's some room between the feet and the ground, so it's going to fall down. But I've experimented with this a little bit, and it really doesn't seem worth it to put the code in there to actually make it stick to the ground, because, I mean, from the player's perspective, you literally cannot see it. It is such a subtle difference. I mean, it's just really not worth the code. Later on, we might do some advanced tutorials, but I just think it's one of those things where it's, you know, it's just not really worth it to put in there, and it's just overcomplicating something that we might as well leave simple for now. So with that being said, let's cut the green screen and go into Unity and show you how to do that inside of Unity. Okay, here we are inside of Unity, and first thing is first, let's actually make the actual crouching button. So we're going to go to Edit, Project Settings, Input, and let's close down all of these arrows. And the first thing we need to do is go up here, whatever number this is, just increase it by 1. And it's going to duplicate the last one on your list. So let's change this to crouch. And the only thing we need to change down here is positive button. So basically this is just the whatever button we want the button to be to return positive when we access the input. So we're going to do left shift. Alright, so now when we hold down left shift and we access crouch from the input.get button, it's going to return us true if left shift is being held down, and it's going to return false if it's not being held down. So let's go into the player movement script and get started. Alright, so first let's do our variables, and what is the first one? Crouch ratio float, and let's ballpark that around 0.3. And now var, can't remember, let's go over transition to crouch sec, transition to crouch sec float, and let's ballpark this at 0.2. And then we had crouching velocity, and we don't need to assign a value to that. And current crouch ratio, and let's have that equal 1 for standing. It's a bit redundant to have it set to 1 since we're going to set it to 1 inside of the awake function, but whatever. Var original crouch, no, what was it? Original local scale Y? Is that what I called it? Original local scale Y. Sweet, okay. Float, and let's not assign that a value. And var crouch local scale Y float, and don't assign that a value. And now let's do function awake. So function awake is called when the game object is created. I think that's the only time it's called. It might be called when a script is attached to a game object, but I think it's whenever the game object is created. So if it's at the start of the game, or if you instantiated the object. So basically just in the beginning, function awake is only going to run once. So let's set crouch ratio to 1 just to be safe. And now let's do original local scale Y equal transform dot local scale dot Y. And now crouch local scale Y equal transform dot local scale dot Y. Where's my times button? Times crouch ratio. And there's 2 spaces in there. That doesn't really matter, but I'm going to clean it up. Okay, cool. So now we have our awake function set. So now let's actually go inside of the code that we're going to be putting inside of the late update. And why in the hell is my mouse not working? Okay, that was weird. I have no idea why my computer just did that, but whatever. Alright, so what was our first line of code? Man, I have the short-term memory of a freaking goldfish. Okay, set the transform.localscale.y, and we're going to mathf.lerp between the two based on current ratio crouch. So let's do that. So we're going to do transform.localscale.y mathf.lerp linear interpolation. That's what lerp is short for, linear interpolation. And the number, if it is 0, which is crouch, local scale y, and then original local scale y, current crouch ratio, semicolon. Cool. Now, if we are crouching, so input dot get button, not get button down, get button, because we want it to return true every frame that we are holding down the button. Crouch. So if the crouch button is being held down, we're going to do current crouch ratio equal mathf dot smooth damp, and the variable that we're at now, which is current crouch ratio, and the target we want to get to, and since we're holding down shift, we want to go to 0 so that it returns this number here, crouch local scale y. So our target is 0, and now we need our velocity, which is crouching velocity, and then transition to crouch sec, the approximate number of seconds we want it to take to actually transition between the two. Now we have if input dot get button crouch equals false. Whoops. Actually, you know what? I'm going to be lazy and copy and paste this whole thing since they're so similar. So, Control C, actually Command C, Command V, and I think the only thing we need to change is that to a 1. Yeah, that's the only thing we need to change. So that's easy. And let me double check, that's all the lines of code. So let's go into Unity and actually give this a little test run. Does not seem like I'm crouching. Let's troubleshoot. Why is this not working? Oh. Here's my problem. I found it. It should be current crouch ratio. There's the problem. Okay. Now, let's try it again. Ah, it works. Cool. So, as you can see, there's that thing I was actually talking about. So actually watch the player capsule up here when I crouch. It lifts off the ground a little bit before it reaches the ground, but if you look in here in the game view, you really can't see it happening. It's so subtle you can't tell. One thing you can tell is that your gun is going through the floor. That's something we need to fix. And the first way that we can fix that is to change our crouch ratio to something more like 0.5. Let's see if that looks better. A little, but we're going to be fixing the gun going through the ground and the floor, so that shouldn't be a problem after this. So I'd say that looks pretty good. Now let me actually move some stuff around. I'm just going to make this a little bit flatter and bring it down a little bit lower, and let's see if that is the right size. No, it needs to be lower. So what I'm trying to do is to make something that I can crouch under but not walk under without crouching. So let me just pull that down just a tiny bit lower. That should do it. Okay, so you can see I can't walk under it without crouching, and I can walk under it while crouching, no problem, but when I let go of shift, my head goes through it and I can't go anywhere. I'm stuck until I crouch again, and then I can move. So that is what we're going to be doing in the next episode, is fixing this glitch right here, and we're going to create some code that tells our game whether or not we are allowed to stand up. So yes, this has been ETSki Tutorials FPS 1.21, how to do basic crouching. So until my next episode, stay tuned for that. Until then, keep making games.